Welcome to BizBytes, brought to you by Com Together, helping businesses like yours build their brand through telling amazing stories to engage and grow audiences on multiple platforms. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of BizBytes. And today I have with me David, who, well, maybe we'll talk about it later on. You won't be able to see it because, of course, you're listening to the podcast, but he's got this magnificent background from Canada behind him, which I love. And so, David, without further ado, welcome to the program, and please introduce yourself to our audience.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you for inviting me onto the show. Look, I've got a long history in energy industry and finance background. So, having worked originally through financial planning analysis type roles, growing up in the industry, through to corporate development, and then out into other areas in corporate finance. I sort of retired from corporate life about 2007-8 and started my own business. And so Thompson Group Holdings. So TGH, we help companies understand, quantify, and try and improve their shareholder value. And we do that through all the things I've been involved in, like strategic planning, financial planning analysis, corporate finance, mergers and acquisitions, and independent valuations. And we do that by, first of all, building best practice financial models to enable us to do all those things. So it's a big corporate finance focus for us.
A really interesting area, and congratulations on being in business for, well, you've what is that, 15 plus years, 16 years nearly. And that's a tremendous achievement within itself. And take me back to then. Actually, I'm interested in going out and leaving the corporate world and going out on your own. That was a pretty big decision at that time.
So it was and it wasn't, because as I said, I went through the industry. I've done 25 years in the Queensland electricity industry and worked my way up to the top exec team. The government sold all the assets, so I basically took the package and ran, and then set up the business. But I went to Deloitte first and ran their business modelling group in Queensland, and then got tapped on the shoulder for a global steel companies to head up their corporate development, or M&A, and that's when I set the business up, because it was basically, what am I going to do? Go full-time again, start my own business. So I've sort of had the business, but I have a lot of clients, but I also take on big, chunky, meaty roles when I think they're really exciting and important. And in fact, I've just come back a couple of years ago. I spent 5 years in Sydney in corporate roles. So it's a little bit of keeping clients, helping them grow, but also if the opportunity rises, particularly in the M&A space or corporate finance world, corporate development, then I'll jump in and help those companies out for whether it be short-term or long-term.
Yeah, that M&A space is a really interesting one, isn't it? Because there's more and more of that happening, and it's a space that I'm starting to explore a little bit from a marketing point of view. But I'm intrigued as to your take on it as well. I've heard it sort of expressed to me probably about a year or so ago that whilst we continue to hear a lot about large-scale mergers and acquisitions, there's a lot happening in the SME space in and around that, of course, because they're not big household brand names, we don't hear too much about. But it is a space that continues to develop, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And again, COVID had created some issues, as you appreciate. Things went on hold. That also created situations where people start to look, well, how do I grow the business? Maybe inorganically. And it's interesting looking at the share market. You see a lot of the press lately about the Australian share market. I think it had a reduction for the first time in 18 odd years or 20 years. And the superannuation funds are growing rapidly. They get that 9.5%, 10%, 11% guaranteed increase coming through, and then start to take out a lot of the big infrastructure assets where my involvement is. So airports, transmission lines, distribution lines, etc. So those things are being started to look at by superannuation funds more in their alternative assets. And then, of course, you come down to the small space. So, we are using that knowledge and expertise and applying it to the SME space. So again, we've got a client right now. We're looking to help them understand their strategy, understand their models, how they work. What's that mean? What's the business worth by itself? Look at the opportunities in the market around where they are, say in Queensland. How do they grow that interstate? And then do the market assessment, market analysis, look at the opportunities. What are they worth individually? Where do the values lie? And then help them understand how to achieve that and where the economies of scale may be, and then basically increase shareholder value accordingly. So it's an interesting space.
Yeah, and I think the common element too, and I don't know if you find this, but the expectations of what people have for exiting their business, whether it's merger and acquisition, or it's in that larger space, or in some cases shutting the doors. It's really interesting what the expectations are initially of what people have for the value of the business and what the reality check might be. There's often quite a significant gap between those two.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, certainly. There's a lot of corporate finance. So if you go from the big end of town, the investment banks, the Macquarie's, UBS, Credit Suisse type firms, and then get down to the smaller firms, and even the big four accounting firms have their M&A practices. Then you get some SMEs, the sort of boutiques, investment firms, and then even down to the business brokers. And it's just interesting how they all view deals or M&A differently, process-wise. So I come from the big end of town. So, we're even 100-year life assets, toll roads, or for life of the concession, or big electricity lines or something like that, power stations, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, water pipelines, for example, so at ports. But then, and that's a lot of that is about building financial models to understand and assess the value of those companies. And you get right down to the very small mum and dad business that might have a couple of million turnover, 100,000 profit, say, and they look at, when you look at those deals at the business broker level or the small M&A, a lot of that's based on maintainable earnings, and a lot of normalization goes into that, and taking out, for example, all the cars and boats and other things they've put into the business, private parts of it. Looking at, what is appropriate salaries versus what they're taking as salaries or dividends, and restructuring the business. So that normalization basically affects their historical earnings. And a lot of businesses in that small market don't actually plan beyond 12 months, 2 years. So for me, it's quite interesting because as I said, I have this approach and concept and history and theory about how to value something and where it comes from. And then you get this whole argument about very small businesses, and what are they worth? 2, 3, 4 times EBITDA profit, or 1 or 2 times revenue, depending on the nature of the business. So quite interesting dichotomy between the scale of the businesses and how they're valued.
And I think ultimately, of course, they're only worth what someone's prepared to pay for them. That's the big factor, isn't it?
Well, in an M&A sense, yes, of course. From a valuation perspective, it's interesting because, you can value a company for lots of reasons, and there are a lot of reasons, for valuing companies. That could be for a takeover defense. It could be for strategic purposes. It could be for regulatory purposes, tax purposes, sale of shares, divorce proceedings, changing of businesses from, company type A to company type B, CGT purposes. So there's lots of reasons, and they're all definition of fair value, market value, fair market value, and then what someone's prepared to pay for it may all be very different.
Yeah, it does make it a tricky space to be in. As you say, there are lots of different reasons why people are getting that analysis, and not always because they actually want to exit the business. I'm fascinated as well. Before we moved out of this area, is in the discussion is tell me, in terms of the mergers and acquisitions that you're seeing, is there just as much movement going where larger companies are getting rid of things that have become smaller businesses unto themselves within it, as opposed to the more traditional way we think about things, where it's going the other way, where larger businesses are acquiring some sets of smaller businesses to add value to their overall asset?
I'm not sure I have enough view of the market around exactly what's happening throughout the world around businesses, etc. But look, a lot of businesses will find that they were in a growth mode, and typically you grow businesses through mergers and acquisitions, and you do things, say, horizontally or vertically. So vertically through a value chain, or horizontally might be expanding geographically. And then you might find that, even my industry where I grew up, the energy industry, you go from electricity, then you bring in gas, and that's dual fuel. Then you might go into the retailing space, which has electricity, gas, and telco. So now you've got product to sell. And then you find, maybe that's not working so well. Or you've got, say, for example, buy now, pay later type businesses. They have very small businesses, credit card, they get mum and dad, they get $5,000 loans. Maybe they get into the commercial side, so they're up into the 20, 30, 60, $100,000 loans. And they're growing all those sectors, or they're growing geography-wise. So, and then all of a sudden you find you've got too much spread. So then you need to refocus. And that can be any size business, right? So, you could own, for example, shops or shopping centres, or shops in shopping centres in, say, Cairns and Melbourne and Perth, and then in Queenstown and Auckland, and then go to the US. And all of a sudden you spread way too thin, right? So I think there's all kinds of reasons why people get into trouble around that. And then some will refocus, some will expand. And it's about product and scalability and what they're good at. And a lot of people sort of, sell off businesses to focus because that's where the margins are.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to sort of explore a little bit further, because going back to, because you've had quite a journey, obviously in the last 15 years, but I'm intrigued as to where you started out. So what was the original qualification and the original goal that you had back in the day?
Back in the day. Yeah. So I guess there is a bit of a history. Very quickly, for my sins, when I was at school, my father was a bricklayer, and he made all us three boys, work for him as a brickies labourer before we all joined the Royal Australian Navy. And he did that for a reason, to teach us never to work for a living. And it was good, right? Because we all were very well-built, strong, tough boys by the time we joined the Navy, all at 15, 16 years of age. And that put us in good stead. So, and I spent 6 years in the Navy as a radio operator, communicator, electronic warfare, so like electronic spikes as a role, but nothing like that outside. So got out of the industry, got out of the Navy, and started with the electricity industry. I had to go back to school to get a qualification, to get senior, and then just started working. He gave me a broom, started sweeping, and then just started working as a clerk, and then started studying for 20, 30 years, up through all the finance. And as I worked my way through, I went into payroll, and then debtors, and then treasury, and then commercial analytical roles, financial controller, financial planning analysis, up to GM finance. So that was the sort of financial career, and that was it within the electricity industry. And that was a good industry grounding. And, I've said this to a lot of people recently as we talk about how did you do what you did, why did you do this, what are you doing now, and how do you know all this stuff? And, if you think about the electricity industry, when you got electricity, retail, generation, transmission, distribution, then back into the coal fields where the coal's coming from, and now renewable energy or gas, etc. It's such a big industry and such an interesting one about dynamically how it works. And when you've got long life assets, particularly in corporate finance space where I come from, I worked in the cash to accrual accounting reforms in 92.3, worked in corporatisation in the industry in 94.5, then the whole reform that went on in the electricity industry in Queensland in 96.7, then set up financial planning analysis functions. So that's a lot of exposure to investment banks, accounting systems, legal structures, commercial deals, what something's worth. We used to do 30, 40 page, 20 column analysis sheets for doing one contract. I started automating everything in the old days, building spreadsheets with Symphony and then Quattro Pro and then Excel, and then using Fortran and COBOL and Pascal and all those programming languages to learn how to build financial models, because through all the restructures that we went through over the years, that's about allocating value, allocating revenues, allocating price structures, and putting assets into various businesses as you restructure structure them, and working out what something's worth. And, a regulatory business can argue a lot, to spend a lot of money arguing around whether the return should be 7 or 7.1%, because it can be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And other businesses don't care if they get anything less, so they need to get more than 25%, 30% return on equity. And they don't really care about 1%, 2% swings. So it's just interesting that industry put me in such a great stead for the future. And so from there, I jumped ship into corporate development, hence the M&A background. So that sort of started me on the path to the deal side, because I couldn't see a way through to CEO where I was. So I jumped ship into corporate development. And then as I said, the government sold all the assets, so I got out. And then Deloitte was financial modelling, but doing M&A and strategic planning with them and corporate finance roles. Then I went to investment. I went to Sydney. I was talking about in Sydney. So 5 years in Sydney, heading up analysis investments, basically global M&A for a fund manager, buying toll roads, airports, ports around the world. And then back into the electricity industry at Spark Infrastructure, which was I was the general manager of strategy business development for Spark. And we bought, try to grow the business and back into renewable energy. So Bowman Solar Farm down at Wagga Wagga in New South Wales, Victorian border. But that's sort of all that process has led me to, within the company. That's the sort of background and expertise that I then bring and try to help other companies go through all those things that I've been through over 30, 40 years.
I was just thinking that it's a lot of bricks. That's what it is. You moved a lot of bricks over a period of time. Just you went from the physical ones to the more metaphorical ones, but certainly some lessons there. It's a huge amount of stepping stones, and to get to where you are with a huge amount of experience. And I think that's. I often say to people that the thing that we market most is our experiences. That's what differentiates one person from the next, is the experiences that we've had and we can call upon to get there. And the journey to get you there is huge, and quite a lesson. Going back to the beginning of that story with your dad. So was his business a building business? Was he a bricklayer?
It was a bricklayer. Yeah. So dad passed away in his 50s. He was an invalid at 40 and heart attacks and etc. So again, the story taught us never to work for a living, not to go through what he went through. So
it shapes you. I think that's the interesting thing about these stories and where we begin, because it does shape the way that you move forward into the future, and literally seeing those, as I said, that metaphorical building the house, or that you've done by stepping up over the years into these different areas. As you say, that energy area is just such a huge area, and it's constantly developing, and even to looking at, we're all familiar with the idea of solar panels going on our houses these days, which we weren't that familiar with probably only about 15 years ago. And now the discussion is not about the solar panels, it's about how big the units are. Are we going to have, can we afford the batteries? And that, in itself brings change into that whole sector as well, doesn't it? Because you've gone from the early days of, it's a chance to make some money by putting back into the grid. Well, that's not the case anymore. And all of those things just keep moving all the time. And I think it's easy to think of an industry like that as being stagnant and say, well, providing electricity, surely that's it. That's all there is. But as you say, there are so many moving parts to that, and it is it's not dissimilar in a whole lot of other industries as well, that it's constantly developing, and technology is having a huge impact on the way the large sectors even develop and create subsectors within them.
Yeah, look, I joined in 1983, so it gives you an idea how old I am. And 40 years, it just has not stopped changing.
I hope you've been enjoying the conversation so far. We look forward to bringing you part 2 in the next episode of Biz Bites. Biz Bites is brought to you by ComTogether for all your marketing needs, so you can build your brand, engage audiences on multiple platforms. Go to comtogether.com.au, follow the links, to book an appointment for a free consultation.